So this is how most people start a business. They look at perfecting their product or service, they put it on a website, they look for investors, and they spend months planning and then finally launching their business to basically crickets. Well, I didn't do any of that. In fact, I built a coffee business, which I believe is going to be $1 million business. And in less than 48 hours, we made over $1,400 in sales. And here's the crazy part. I did it without a product, without a website, without a storefront. I didn't even have a single bean of coffee here in Canada. Basically, this is my coffee company, Money Coffee. And I didn't have any of this when I got started. And my aim was to basically validate whether this business idea would even work by getting people to actually pay money. Now, if you're wondering why should you even listen to me, it's because I spent the last 5 years building numerous businesses from food and beverage to fintech to media to consulting. Some that failed, some that actually worked, but each one taught me the same thing. The hardest part isn't the product or service. It's actually getting someone to pay you hard cash. It's getting someone to pay you for the product or service. And that's exactly what I want to show you today with Money Coffee. This isn't just a story about coffee or how you can build a coffee business, but instead it's a step-by-step blueprint that you can follow to validate any business idea fast, even if you're working a full-time day job right now with limited time and even budget constraints. And to make this even more actionable, I put together a free guide for you. 15 steps in 15 days to start something of your own, even if you have a full-time day job. It's honestly the framework and advice I wish I had when I started my first business. Comment guide and I'll send it over to you. So let's actually get into it. I'm going to break down exactly how I went from zero to profitable in under 72 hours, what worked, what didn't, and how you can apply the same playbook to whatever you're planning to build. Okay, so the first thing I want to stress on is basically the conventional trap. It's what I mentioned earlier. It's what most first-time founders do. And I wouldn't say it's not just first-time founders, but a lot of people are programmed to build a business in the most corporate way possible because that's what you're used to, right? You're kind of taught to think about how do we scale, but going from 0 to 0.1 is something that not a lot of people talk about because they're trying to use the strategies that they're using at their day jobs to go from 3 to 100 or even 1,000, if that makes sense. Because the whole concept of starting something is basically going 0 to 1, but the really small part of doing that is basically going 0 to 0.1. So the conventional trap is basically they try to build out the perfect product or service and they try to obsess over sourcing or logistics. In this case with coffee, there's a lot to do with sourcing and logistics. And then you kind of focus on design, brand, and packaging. And then there's the whole part about, building a website, app or checkout, and then setting up legal, GST, incorporation, banks, and then, spend even more time on logos, color palettes, and mockups. And then after doing all of that, like this whole thing takes them months. And because of doing all of this, two things happen, right? Either they feel like they're progressing, where every single thing that's mentioned here is like something that's in your control. For instance, anyone can build out a perfect product. Anyone can kind of get the sourcing and logistics right. Anyone can build out the brand and packaging. Anyone can do the website. Anyone can incorporate. Anyone can set up legal. Anyone can make a logo, make a color palette, mock up, whatever. But the part that's the trickiest and the toughest thing to do is basically sell. This is the part that most people don't do, and it just doesn't come naturally to them. So it's not really their fault. It's not easy for you to get shot down, take rejection, and kind of stare, rejection literally in the face, where you put yourself out there and you get shot down, right? And so that is the main reason why most people focus on all of this, the first bit. And this is why it doesn't really take off. Most business ideas never take off, and that's why most people are stuck. If I were to draw, a spectrum of going 0 to 100, most people are kind of stuck here. It's really this part. If you don't sell, you don't have revenue, you don't have paying customers, and that means you don't have a business, you just have a hobby. So the more you can start reprogramming your brain and stop thinking about all of this and start focusing on selling, distribution, marketing, that is where things are going to really pick up. I would even say marketing would come somewhere down the line, but selling is something you need to get better and better at doing. And the problem with selling, like I mentioned earlier, it's a very psychologically taxing activity where you need to put yourself out there and you'll get rejected, shot down, whatever. This is why you'll see some of the biggest entrepreneurs and some of the biggest tycoons, you'll see that they actually start off by just shamelessly selling their product or service. Like Mark Cuban has done this time and again where he's gone door to door and tried to sell a bunch of shit. And I would really recommend that even if you're not an entrepreneur and you're not planning to build something of your own, you should really start adopting the sales mindset. It goes a long way in life. Like I already mentioned, the main reason is because all of this is in your control, but revenue is not. And so unless you have sales, you don't have revenue. If you don't have revenue, you don't have a business. And so the real risk is that you might spend all this time, and this is what most people do. I've spoken to at least 20 aspiring entrepreneurs as of creating this video where they have reached out to me because they need help with building a business of their own. 90% of them have already gotten started with something. It's either like an e-com product or some kind of product or service online, and they've built out a website, they've incorporated the company, they've done all of it, but not a single dollar in sales. And like I said, if you don't have sales, it's not a business. Another big reason people give up is because there's a lot of cash and time that's spent into this, and then they kind of think it's sunk cost. And so my rule that I try to abide by, and this is what I try to teach others as well, is you don't build a business hoping the customers will come. What you instead need to do is that you need to find your customers first and then build a business around them. There are a lot of people that want to educate a customer and kind of convert them into a customer. You can convert them if on some psychological level they feel that there's a benefit to the product. But if you're coming up with something that requires a lot of unlearning, a lot of nurturing, way too much nurturing, and getting a customer to really understand what you're trying to bring to the table, then you have already lost, because you're basically spending so much time trying to sell something to someone who just doesn't want to buy. And this is why a lot of ad spend, a lot of the money they throw at influencers just goes to waste, because you need sort of a product market fit. You need a product and audience fit. Unless you know who you're selling to, you're basically spraying and praying, and that's not going to get you anywhere. And so in my case, what I wanted to do was think about whether I can sell this before I even made this. Like for instance, this packet didn't exist. Like I didn't have this packet ready for a month after all my orders for phase 1 were completely taken. The point I'm trying to make is you don't want to get into the business of building out this logo, this packet, choosing the packet, figuring out what the coffee is going to be. You're just trying to look at whether there's a demand in the market and you're trying to fulfill it. And so the quicker you can do that, the quicker you can validate that, the quicker you'll actually know whether your business is going to work or not. Now, how did I actually go about doing that? So there are numerous ways you can identify a pain point or the problem. This could be something that you might be facing yourself, and so you decide to build a product or service around it, which is a tested approach for business ideas for sure. But another way is you can actually start talking to other people and realize that this is a pain point or an issue that a lot of other people are facing. Another way to do this is to basically go to Reddit threads or Facebook groups or places where people are already thronging, and you notice a very common underlying pattern. And that pattern could be a pain point. If it is a pain point and you can solve that small pain point, then chances are you'll get paid for it. And so in my case, it was basically the former. Like I had this personal frustration where I felt like in Canada, most coffee tastes pretty generic and same. It's like very flat and generic. Like I tried making a lot of coffee at home, and so I picked up Folgers, Starbucks, even a lot of the specialty range from Pilot Coffee to DeMello and a bunch of different names, right? And I felt like the coffee, maybe as a brewed coffee or black coffee, was fine, it was good, but I'm the kind of person who likes a good latte, and I just didn't like the kind of taste or the flavor from these coffees. And one thing that I really missed was South Indian filter coffee. I grew up in Bangalore, and so for a lot of people that don't know, India has a lot of coffee grown in the south of India. Like a lot of coffee. Some of the best coffees in the world comes from India. Most people don't know that. Most people outside India don't know that. A lot of people think that India is only known for tea. Actually, in South India, filter coffee is synonymous to just regular coffee, and it tastes fantastic. It is freaking awesome. And there is definitely some kind of a nostalgia around it, right? Like, I didn't really grow up drinking it, but once I, got into the corporate world, I used to drink this on a regular every single day, and it tasted phenomenal. It's better than most lattes I've had here. And so there was always this craving and this need for me to want to get coffee from there here. And so what I started doing was I started looking online to see where I can get filter coffee. And then I realized that most of the filter coffee that I can buy online was marked up so much. It was fucking ridiculous. There was like import duties and taxes of about 40 to 50%. And I was like, this is fucking ridiculous. I'm not going to spend this kind of money to get basic filter coffee. And just so you know, filter coffee in India is dirt cheap. It's not that expensive at all. And so the only way I could get filter coffee here was basically to go to an Indian store nearby. And there too, they had just one or two variants, and it was like bottom of the barrel kind of stuff. There was this whole longing for good coffee. There was also this longing for South Indian filter coffee. And so that's how my idea really started, to be honest. I started kind of talking to people around me, and I started asking them questions saying, do you also face the same thing, right? Like, the point I was trying to validate was, if I want this badly, then probably others do too. And a lot of my friends also echo the same frustrations. And then I thought, okay, is there a way for me to bring a bold, premium, heritage rooted coffee experience to North America? And when I started talking to people, a lot of people here, I realized that most people didn't even know there was Indian coffee. And so when I started peeling back these layers, I was like, should I position this as just Indian coffee, or just go for the South Indian filter variant and just target the Indian diaspora? Or should I just take a step back and think about whether I can come up with something that's novel or new? Basically getting coffee from India, which in itself is novelty, right? So I was like, maybe that might make more sense. And so what I started doing was I started talking to Canadians and local folks to see whether they shared the same frustrations that I mentioned here, which is, do you also feel like the coffee is subpar and it's not that great? And a lot of people told me the same thing. They go to Tim's because they need their kick of caffeine, but otherwise they don't feel like, if they spend like $8 or $10 on a latte or the coffee, it tastes phenomenal or great. It tastes like pretty much like any other coffee place. And so I started positioning this as unique coffee for North America. And unique in the sense, it's coming from a place where you normally don't get coffee landed here, and that's coming from India. But I'm not positioning it as an Indian coffee because, we don't want to call it Indian, but instead I'm positioning it only in the premium grade. And like I said, everything was bottom of the barrel stuff here when I look at filter coffee and other Indian coffee. And so I was like, let me just target only premium coffee and even specialty coffee, I would say. And the point I'm trying to make is that because I was obsessed with this whole thing, because I had an actual pain point, it became very easy for me to start thinking about what the solution could be. And so everything comes down to the problem first and not the solution. You don't want to just come up with a product and try to sell it. What you want to think about is if the product is actually serving a purpose and whether it kind of fits into the market. And so the big principle here is that the best businesses solve the founder's own problem. But like I said, you could potentially talk to other people and figure out what they are going through if that's something that doesn't vibe with you. But if you actually face a pain point yourself, then my suggestion is don't overthink it. Don't try thinking about how you can make millions by coming up with a product. What you need to do instead is just talk to other people who you feel are like-minded, or just other people in general, and see whether this is something that they would also pay money for, and if it's something that they feel and kind of vibe with. So let's actually move on to the next part. And I actually fell prey to a trap. Basically, I didn't work on this for the longest time because I felt like the coffee needed to be made a certain way, which meant that for the beverage to taste a certain way, I had to actually own a cafe. And so the only way this could actually take off is if I decide to open a cafe. Now that is the stupidest way to go about running this business, because a premium cafe experience would really stand out for sure. But the flagship cafe is a high risk and high capital, because when I did the numbers and I crunched it, it came to about $700,000 to $800,000 Canadian. I was just like, dude, that's a ridiculous investment. Like, I don't even know whether this is going to work, and it'd be stupid for me to start looking for investors and try to get this off the ground. And again, this is what a lot of people do. Either their dreams fizzle out or they die, because they're like, oh shit, I can't get $700 to $800 as an investment, or they actually go around looking for investors to get the business off the ground. Both are not scalable, both are stupid options. What you need to figure out is what is your minimum viable product or service. And so I was like, I need this business to actually take off, and I'm not going to go around looking for like $1 million as an investment to get started. So what I started doing was I started studying other case studies in the industry, and I also had an F&B background because the first business I started was in the food and beverage space. So I started reaching out to a few people in that space, and I shifted completely to thinking about what's the minimum viable product, like I mentioned earlier. And so thinking about how you can have a product first, scale first brand with multiple monetization paths. What really tells you whether a business is going to do well is if you have numerous upside and upsell potential. And in this case, I noticed that with just getting one type of coffee or few types of coffee sorted or perfected, opportunities are limitless or endless. And so I'll give you an example, right? Just getting one of these bags or one of these variants or SKUs ready, it means that I can start selling this on the B2B side to different hotels, restaurants, cafes. I can sell it to retail stores where they position coffee that's white labeled, or I can go the B2C route and sell it on my own website. I could sell it on Amazon, I could sell it on online retail, in an actual physical store. So opportunities are basically limitless. And once we kind of get into this line, we can then go down the whole F&B route and do numerous other things, and eventually get into the cafe space and the hospitality space too, if that's something that really works. And so the big question I had to ask myself was, how else could this scale? And the options were there were B2C, B2B, subscriptions, kits, retail. And so the main intent here is that I wasn't selling coffee anymore. I was basically validating a platform for many lines of business. And this is what really attracted me to this particular business opportunity, because the upside was like really, really high. Like I had a lot of potential and a lot of different lines of businesses. And so that's exactly why I decided to pursue this. Now that I knew that I wanted to kind of go down this route, I spoke to my customers. The real piece I wanted to focus on was, how do we get the coffee to really stand out? Like, how do we ensure that this coffee is going to sell more than any other coffee? And so the only way to do that is if you have a very strong hypothesis. And just so you know, like, strategy is a very loaded term. Like, a lot of people say this is the perfect strategy, but honestly speaking, strategy is basically a hypothesis. It's basically a direction we want to head. And the only thing that can ensure if it's a good strategy is if you can improve your odds of success. That is all there is. There is nothing like a sure shot strategy. Maybe the odds of success are super high for a good strategy. And that's basically what I try to do, where you don't know whether with certainty something's going to work. All you can do is basically stack probabilities. And so that's what I was trying to do. And so my three initial hypotheses is what I mentioned earlier. I only wanted to target the premium and specialty space. I wasn't going to go after commodity coffee. So Starbucks and Tim's and Folgers and all of these are basically in the commoditized space, and I didn't want to play that game. And again, this kind of aligned with the top 1% standard I personally follow as my personal mission statement. It's the same thing that I do with my life. It's the same thing I do with my F&B venture. It's the same thing with my Unimedia as well. You can literally see it on Unimedia's website too. And so the non-negotiable piece was to really have premium sourcing and have it roasted here in Canada. Second hypothesis was that Indian coffee is criminally underrated. Like, a lot of people didn't even know about this. And so there was basically unique elevations, flavor profiles, generational craft, and it was like almost unknown in North America. And that is a key factor. Like, if we can subtly position it in a way that it tastes different, it has a unique flavor and people like it, and then eventually they find out, oh, this is coming from India, it's not coming from either Africa or South America like most coffee is, that would be a massive boon for us. It's a great story arc. And then finally, the hedge in the business was that the South Indian filter coffee deserves the global stage. Recently, Taste Atlas had ranked South Indian filter coffee as the number 2 beverage globally, which I think was freaking insane. And I completely concur and agree, because the coffee tastes incredible. So if you haven't had a good cup of South Indian filter coffee, my suggestion is you should go probably to India and try it out, or you can get this particular variant and you can try it yourself. It's fucking insane. So the main takeaway here is that you must have at least some sort of a hypothesis or hypotheses, and you need to validate that before you scale. And that's the only way this works. The funny piece is the only way to validate is by not just talking to people and getting someone to say, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to buy this, or this is a great business idea. No, what you need to do is you need to sell like your life depends on it. If it sells, then great, you have a business idea that probably has some potential. Just because you sell doesn't mean it'll 100% work too. Like, I don't know whether this is going to 100% work, but just the hypothesis and the story I put together, I have a very strong feeling that this is going places. So that's the same thing you need to do. How do you validate before you start spending obnoxious amounts of money, time, and effort? That's what you need to do. And that comes from having a hypothesis mindset and then validating it quickly. Okay, so before we get into the selling piece, my suggestion would be to see how you can quickly validate something, right? Is there really a problem here, or are you just making this up in your head? And so the simplest thing you can do is, you do field research. So you go to cafes and you talk to customers. You go ask them, why are they here at a cafe? And the reason why I'm going to a cafe is because obviously the beverage is perfected or seems to be perfected there. But like I said, the pain point I had was I wasn't happy with any of the coffee options I got at most of these coffee places. So I decided to just go there a few weekend mornings or a few random mornings, and I just had conversations with customers. And I was asking them, do you go there for the ambience or to work, or are you going there for the coffee? Most people said that they were there actually for the vibe and the experience there, and they felt like the coffee was not exceptional at all and they didn't like it as much. It was just a means for them to get a spot to park their butts and have their meeting or get work done. Then the same thing I did after cafes. I went down to a grocery aisle, right? And I asked people who were buying coffee or looking at coffee options, and I asked them, like, are you buying this out of habit? Are you only in the premium category? Are you looking only for specific types of coffee? Or are you just like, I just need my caffeine kick, so I'm just going to get coffee? And I realized that a lot of people fell into just the first category, and there were also a few people that focused on premium and specialty coffee. They were very particular about the coffee that they got, but most people are like, I just need it because it's a form of sustenance. But there are some places where I get great coffee, or I reminisce that kind of coffee, and I'd love to have that coffee on a daily basis. So that further validated what I was trying to say. Then finally, I also got a couple of my friends to taste my filter coffee at home, and they were unanimously impressed. And when I say friends tasting my filter coffee, I'm talking about basically just filter coffee that I get at the nearest Indian store. This is not this coffee because, like I said, I didn't have this coffee ready. So the idea was to see whether people liked filter coffee over regular coffee or the coffee that they made at home or some of the other coffees that they would have had in, maybe a nearby cafe. People felt like the coffee tasted really, really good. And so one part was focusing on the field research, but the other part was focusing on the awareness. And like I said, more I spoke to people, the more I realized that most people didn't even know that there was Indian coffee, something called Indian coffee. Some of the best coffee in the world that goes out to Europe and to the Middle East all comes from India. Anyway, so that kind of meant that there's a place we could actually carve out a story or a narrative for ourselves. But this quickly validated the real pain points. This also quickly showed me that there is a real opportunity here. Anyway, so that was basically the setup to validating a business idea before you actually validate it by selling it. Yeah, so that's one thing you have to do, right? You have to do a quick validation, and you'll see a lot of this is qualitative in nature because you're talking to people, you're trying to jot things down yourself, understand what is the kind of feedback that you're getting, and then you get to know whether there really is a pain point or not. But another important thing you need to focus on is something called qualitative validation. This is where you can see trends. It's basically analytics to see what the market opportunity is like, what's the TAM like, the target addressable market. So what you need to really do is see whether the hypotheses you have is reflected in what people are searching for and what people are buying and what people basically vibe with. And so in this case, let me take my example. It was to see whether the hypotheses aligned with searches for premium specialty coffee, Indian origin coffee, South Indian filter coffee. Oh yeah, I haven't included the screenshots here. So what I'll do is I'll show the screenshots here of few of the searches that I've done, and the findings are pretty compelling, right? Like you see filter coffee, it's a niche, but it's rising. And you can see that it's a trend, it's an upward trend over time. Indian coffee is modest but is also growing. There is definitely an upside to this. Different or unique or new coffee were like really strong terms, and there were a lot of searches for this in Canada and the US. The idea was to see whether there is really a market for this, whether people really spend money on this, and I realized that there is a huge baseline coffee demand in North America, just like most places around the world. I feel like another big reason why I wanted to get into the coffee business was because it's like the most widely accepted and used drug on earth, and so I was like, this is not going anywhere. And also it's a good hedge against AI, right? So that's another big reason. It's a physical product that I want to really triple down on. But there was a huge baseline coffee demand in North America, and clearly the numbers also reflected that. Apart from that, I realized that instead of just playing the commodity game, if we went for the premium segment and went for like around $20 to $25 a bag, which isn't too much, but it's definitely not cheap. It might mean small audience, but it'll definitely mean meaningful revenue. And that's what I decided to do. I'd rather go top 1% quality, like I said, as opposed to just trying to cater to the masses. Doing like a very basic math, you'll see that just having 5,000 buyers at $25 a pop gives us about $125,000 a year. And this is not even including repeats and subscriptions, right? So clearly there is definitely a demand for something like this. And we're just talking about 5,000 coffee buyers. That's nothing. The idea was to really look at how the market is trending, look at how things are positioned in the market. You don't want to re-educate or educate the customer. What you really need to do is serve existing demand better. You do not want to create demand from scratch. You don't want to play that game, because then it just becomes like an endless well of marketing budget. You don't want to play that game. So this was a very easy and quick way for you to validate that. All right, so going to the next one. This is something I touched on earlier, but I'll again briefly touch on it. Instead of going, high risk and high capex with a cafe, I decided to just go with very basic, like the actual product or coffee itself, and decided to, tap into the D2C, which is basically, like a website or directly on retail, and also try looking at the B2B wholesale market. And the big decision was to, like I said, start lean with the core product, in this case, beans or powder, to really validate paying demand. And over the course of doing this, our name gets out there, Money Coffee gets out there. The more I talk about it, the more people consume coffee, the better it becomes in terms of visibility. And that might again seep back into the B2B and the B2C side. And finally, figure out how we can think about scalability next, right? Like I'm going to just pick out one particular vertical or area or line of business I want to triple down on for the next, say, foreseeable future, a few quarters. But the idea is knowing fully well that there are other opportunities for scalability. Anyway, I touched on this earlier, so I'm not going into this in detail right now. But the point I'm trying to make is a lot of people get overwhelmed by that. I believe that if you have money or pre-revenue, you can get anything done. So basically, if I knew that there were customers here who are willing to pay, I knew maybe fairly well that I could get the orders fulfilled. Because if I look at what the supply chain looks like and what the steps look like, it's just a matter of finding a coffee provider. It could be an estate or someone who's a coffee seller at the green beans level, get it to be roasted by a roasting expert or a roastery, and finally have it landed here in Canada, and then I have it shipped out. That isn't too much of a challenge because I can kind of figure out how we can get there. And again, I'm not going to overwhelm myself thinking about every single step and how it's going to work at scale, because that's not the whole point here. We are just focusing on going from 0 to 0.1, like I keep saying. And so what's needed when you go 0 to 0.1 is very, very different from just thinking about what happens if the company blows up. We're not even getting to that point. But the reason I mentioned that is because I knew fairly quickly how I was going to fulfill these orders. But luck has a very interesting way of playing out. So there are a lot of people that talk about how they got lucky in the process. I believe that if you start putting yourself out there, then luck is bound to find you. That's just how luck works, in my opinion. And I have a story to really prove that, right? In this case, I didn't have a product specialist or a product partner. Like I had no one I could count on to really source the product from, but I knew I could get a few vendors on board. But this is how serendipity works, right? It's like it's rightly mentioned here, it's preparation meets serendipity. I had traveled to India for my wife's sister's wedding, and I, being the person I am, started talking to every single one about ideas. I started telling them openly about what I was trying to do with Money Coffee. This is the vision that I have. And I should say that a lot of people don't do this, and it's a massive, massive mistake. They try to closet the idea because they think that their idea is somewhat unique, and if they give out ideas, then people are going to kind of steal the idea and run with it. Just remember that ideas are cheap and execution is rare. Okay, so I have this friend who, when we were talking about his business idea, proclaimed openly that if you steal or infringe on my business idea, then I'm going to come and sue you. And he was trying to make it seem like he was getting other witnesses to hear this and something along those lines. And I just remember thinking to myself, dude, no one gives a shit. Like, no one thinks bigger of your idea than yourself. Like, you are the only one who thinks this idea is the best idea on earth. A lot of people might find your idea to be good, but what's key is execution. Not a lot of people spend time on something they don't believe in. And so the part I want to really, really stress on is you should start talking to everyone about your business idea, because no one's going to steal it and run away with it. Because honestly, if they took your idea and they acted on it before you do, then honestly, they deserve it. They actually deserve it because they actually put it into action. And so the point I'm trying to make is, don't closet your ideas. Don't try to hide your ideas. Talk to people. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I was talking to my mother-in-law about, doing this idea, and she mentioned that I have a relative, or she has a relative, running a buzzing cafe in Bangalore. And I was just like, oh, okay, that's a coincidence. And then the more I started reading about this, and the more I started understanding about who he is, I realized that he's an expert in like sourcing and roasting. And he was invited as a panelist at numerous roasting associations. I think he's part of the Indian Coffee Board. He's a pretty big name in that community. And apparently when I sat down with him and I was chatting with him, there's about 6,000 to 10,000 cups per day via his clients that are consumed on a daily basis. That's a lot of coffee coming from his cafe or his roastery. So which meant that he has serious scale and credibility. And so what I decided to do was I sat with him, I walked him through everything I'd done till now, the research phases, where I'm planning to head with this. He was a Kannadiga, another person from Bangalore, so he kind of vibed with the whole concept of South Indian filter coffee and just coffee from India in general. And he was actually pretty clear about wanting to do something in the international space. Like, a lot of his work was being done domestically. And so when I asked him that, would you want to join me as a partner? He said, 100% yes. All of this wouldn't have happened if I didn't actually talk about my ideas openly. That's the biggest takeaway here. If you have an idea, you need to start telling every single one. Two reasons. One, you never know what kind of doors that might open up. I know a friend who started openly talking about his idea, and then he finally got an investor because he was just randomly talking to people about it. And the second reason is, of course, you tell people for accountability, which we'll talk about later. But if you need your idea to take form and you want the right people to start partnering with you, you need to start talking to every single person about it. You need to start getting obsessed with it. And so the big takeaway here is that luck favors momentum. So share ideas and be prepared to pitch. So now that I had a partner who I could count on to make the actual coffee and source it the right way, it was just a matter of then finalizing the product line. So it's after I spoke to him that I realized that there are obviously nuances to coffee, things that I'd already known, but he was able to shed light on it in a way that I couldn't, because only an expert who's been in the space could really approach it that way. And so I had a few hypotheses with the kind of products. So the three coffee bags that I did show you, my suggestion was to triple down on the space for Arabica coffee, because that's something that's big in North America. But I realized that even Robusta coffee is something that is huge in Southeast Asia and even in India for that matter, but not too prominent here in North America. And so I decided to, have a chat with him regarding that. And he said 100% yes, we should focus a lot on Robusta coffee. And finally, like what I mentioned earlier, the whole classic South Indian filter coffee was basically always going to be one of the SKUs or the variants. And yeah, the format of coffee that we were planned to offer was either in the beans or ground format. And the idea was to target either serve home baristas convenience buyers or even filter lovers. The whole concept was to really position it in a way that it worked for this market. And like I mentioned, Arabica seems like an obvious bet. Robusta was up and coming, and it still is up and coming. I would say it's a good bet for markets where Robusta coffee isn't a big deal. But again, like I don't want to stress on what these different variants are. The point I'm trying to make is everything that I'd set up in terms of the hypothesis earlier and in terms of the variants really came down to knowing what would fit in the market. So a little bit of digging, and I realized that these were the right ones to go kind of move forward with. In your case, if you're validating a business idea, it's about thinking through what would your ideal MVP list of products or services be. So in my case, I just picked 3, although there are 100 types of coffees that we could have targeted. But I was like, let's keep it simple, knowing fully well what would work, what was the hedge, and what can we get started with so that there's enough of a choice for the customer. And so so the big takeaway here is that it wasn't just random SKUs, but it was like strategic bets. From there, it was putting together a minimum viable offering, right? So it's a minimum viable product. So those are the 3 variants I decided to triple down on. And at this point, I didn't have a logo, I didn't have a packet, I didn't have anything, right? Like I just had this idea of wanting to sell these 3 types of variants of coffee. So for me to put together something that would clearly explain what would the customer be buying, there are different ways I can go about doing this. This could be a website, this could take the form of an app, it could take the form of a PDF or a flyer, and I actually chose that because I was like, what's the easiest, most nimble, lean way for us to do this? And so I was like, can I put this together on a basic flyer, and can I share the flyer and get people to buy it? And for me to do that, I obviously had to brand the flyer, right? So we'll get into the flyer and the details of the PDF in a bit, but before that, I had to think about the branding piece, like I mentioned. But apart from the branding piece, it was also figuring out what would the price points be like and figuring out where would we be sourcing our coffee from. So the good thing was, because I had a partner, I had a call with him and one of the estate owners that he knew, and we knew where to kind of source roasting or the coffee and logistics from. And then also, how would we get beans and like ground coffee and in what format, so that I knew that the 3 variants would have either bean format or a ground coffee format. And then talking to different people, doing sort of a market study, I realized that the target pricing would be around $22 Canadian for a 340 gram or a 12 ounce bag of coffee, which basically meant that it's a premium tier, but it's still below median. And this meant that even in phase 1, our margins would be about 40 to 45% if we were planning to sell about 30 bags of coffee. And so once I had these things sorted out, I also had to do the branding piece, like I mentioned. So all I did was I literally went on Canva and I put together a very basic logo. It took me, I think, just an hour or so to put this together. I chose some font style. I did use AI a little bit. Somehow intuitively, because I've been in the design and content space, this whole coffee bean that you see at the top, that kind of came to me, and I was like, you know what, I'll just put this together. And this is something I literally put together one morning when I was just in India. And that's it. So the point is, a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to perfect the logo, perfect the name, perfect the design. You don't need any of that. Just come up with something that looks and reflects the kind of vision that you have. And in my case, I was looking for premium coffee, and this kind of encapsulated that. And I like the whole accent on top of the E, because Money sounds pretty non-Indian too, and then on top of that, it's going to a lot of people are going to maybe call it main coffee and whatnot, so it's going to be a play on the word money as well, which is great. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the logo and any other thing with the design was something that barely took me any time. And this actually brings me to phase 1, which is probably the most important part or the most interesting part of this entire piece, which was I gave myself only 2 to 3 days to try and sell as much of the product as I possibly can. It's important for us to have a deadline, and also important for us to have a target. So if you look at what I'd set for myself from a goal perspective, it was to hit 30 bags of coffee, and not just like people saying I'm interested in this. It's more so trying to get 30 people or 30 bags of coffee sold. 30 bags of coffee would mean that there's clearly a demand for this, and it makes sense for me to kind of move forward with this idea in the first place. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there were numerous ways I could have thought about putting together the product. It could have been on a website, it could have been on an app, it could have been on, it could have taken numerous forms. But the one I decided to stick to was basically a simple flyer. And so this is basically the flyer that we put together. And like you can see, at the logo that I had put together kind of took center stage here, and we clearly called out each of these variants of coffee, and we explained at the bottom what each of these variants were, and the colors and designs is something that my wife helped out with a little bit, the pronunciation and what does money really mean. And I also decided to call this batch the founders batch and price it at $17.50, which is discounted. So the concept was that, can we get people to buy but also give them some sort of benefit, letting them know that they're part of the founders batch or the initial batch. And so literally this design was just to show or give our customers or potential customers an idea of what they're buying into. But the part that is really intriguing is that every single thing you see here, all of these are all AI generated. Like, I didn't even have this bag. Like, if you look at this particular bag of coffee, it looks pretty close to this variant you see right here. But actually, it was completely AI, but not a single person knew that it was AI when I shared it with them. And I think that's just the beauty of, the time that we live in today, right? Like, you can spend a few minutes or hours on, your system and get ChatGPT to kind of spin up a design or an illustration or even a strategy for you, and you don't even need to go to an expert. In this case, I didn't need to go to an expert designer or an illustrator. And again, like I said, only the basic stuff is what I called out. I called out what the size of the coffee is going to be, what type. It's an Arabica coffee, this one's a Robusta coffee, this one's a South Indian filter coffee. But fundamentally this painted a clear picture of what they were buying into. And then I also had another page to the flyer, which is basically a way for us to sell more. And so in this case, it is offering free delivery only if you bought the bundle. And so the bundle was basically providing all three coffees. So if you picked up a bundle where you got one variant of each SKU, then you would basically we would give it to you at a discounted rate of $49.99, but at the same time you would also get free delivery across Canada. And the second one was, if you were a South Indian filter coffee aficionado, we would give you a free Money branded South Indian filter. So for people who don't know, this is basically a top-down filter where you fill the coffee grounds in the top half of the percolator or the machine, and then you kind of just pour hot water at the top, and it trickles trickles down to the bottom and collects the espresso, the decoction as they call it, collects at the bottom. That's it. And so these are the 2 pages of the flyer, and this took me maybe again like half a day to put together. But imagine if I decided to build a website, right? At this point I had picked up the domain, which didn't take me any time obviously. But if I were to even think about building a website, it meant that it would have delayed this whole thing by quite a few weeks. And again, being a perfectionist, I would have tried to perfect the design and whatnot. But the point I'm trying to make is, this was a very simple way for you to paint someone a picture about what you're selling. And yeah, so all I did was I packaged this up, and I decided to reach out only to my first and second circle on WhatsApp. It was a one-on-one outreach. It wasn't on any website, there was no app, nothing. So all I did was I simply shared the flyer that I showed you. And the way I got this list was, I thought of every single person I could in my warm network or in my closest network of people who are here in Canada and who would maybe like coffee, right? I don't even know if they'd like coffee. And so all I did was I opened up a Notion page and jotted down every single person's name. I think I gave myself, like, I say 2 hours, but actually I gave myself less than like 30 minutes to just jot down every single name I could think of. And then from there, I reached out to each and every single one of them, had a conversation. And again, I wasn't selling it. I wasn't broadcasting the message. This is another part that a lot of people get wrong. I just reached out to them, had a conversation, the kind of thing you would have if you finally landed a meeting with your prospect. Like the first meeting is more just understanding what their inclinations are, what's their current situation like, do they really have a pain point or something along those lines. And so my goal with about 80% of the conversation I had with them was to really think about whether they had a pain point. I wouldn't even say pain point, it was just knowing whether they liked coffee. And there were a couple of people who just said, you know what, I don't drink coffee. So I was like, no point me selling to them. So I didn't sell anything to them. I just let them know that I'm doing this and that's that. And so so the plan was to give them the founders batch discounted at $17.50. The target was to hit about 30 bags, like I said. Additionally, I also had the whole starter bundle and the filter kit add-on like I just showed you. So everything was AI generated, and the idea was to make it look as realistic as possible. It was a basic clean flyer that I created on Canva, and the entire thing I focused on was that it's freshly roasted, it's ethically sourced, and it's unique taste. And my CTA in all of these were basically, WhatsApp or iMessage me and just pay by Interac e-transfer, basically transfer it to my bank account. That's it. Personal ID. I didn't have a bank account, I didn't have an incorporation, I didn't have anything, right? The idea was to just get them to pay money. And so it might seem like there's a lot of friction. There is friction, there is a little bit of friction. And honestly, there was intentionally some friction so that it really validated whether this is an actual business idea or not. And so if they still ended up buying, the validation is real. All right, so now that I showed you how I approached phase one, I think it's important for us to go back to that whole sales motion or how I approach the sales, because most people, what they end up doing is they try to broadcast their message. What they'll do is they'll send out these broadcast one-to-many message with just a link saying, hey, if you'd like to buy, please buy, or something along those lines. I'm sure you've faced this before, but that really doesn't work. And especially if you try to put it in a group and you try to cater to everyone that way, it really doesn't work. The conversion rate is really freaking low. So instead, what you need to really focus on is that one-on-one piece, like I mentioned. And this is super crucial in the validation phase, because to be honest, you would never actually do this whole one-on-one piece later, because once you start scaling, you need to have tech or other operations or other systems that take care of this. But for the most bit, especially because you're validating it with your warm and your hot or your first circle, I think it's very important for you to approach it one-on-one. Now within this, there's a 4-step DM framework that I followed. One was to kind of, have like a warm contact, small talk, engage, re-engage. Some people I haven't spoken to for so long, so it's almost like, hey, how you doing? All of those things. Next piece was just understanding their coffee habits. It's a discovery and understanding more about what their preferences and inclinations are. So talking to them about their frequency, brew gear, home versus cafe, and then finally talking about what the actual offer is based on everything that they mentioned in this step. Like try to position what you're selling according to everything that they mentioned in the discovery phase or what you just asked. And again, this might seem like a lot of things, but it's basically just one long conversation. Right? And as you go through that, you talk to them about the benefit of the coffee and what is different or what's unique or whatever you're trying to sell. So in my case, I was telling them that if you like South Indian filter coffee, we have a variant there. If you're sick and tired of regular coffee, then we have coffee that's novel, that's kind of new. You'd love to try it out. And while doing that too, I start talking about social proof and scarcity. I did tell them that we're only selling 30 bags and we have sold 3, and we're just looking to wind up with our founding batch of 30 bags of coffee. So if you can, if you're interested, then you need to let me know ASAP. And if so, just make the transfer. I'll slot you in and I'll have you added to the list. If they said yes, these are the kind of responses I got. I would recommend them the best SKU. What I noticed was that the bundle was a huge hit because it got them to try all 3 variants of coffee. But based on their preference, I would suggest them that this is what would work. And if they say that they are not a coffee drinker, what I did ask was for one referral. Basically tell me one person who you think would be a good fit for this coffee. This step is something a lot of people ignore in the validation and the initial steps of building a business. When you're reaching out to your warm circle or even reaching out to anyone and you're having a chat with them and you feel like the person I'm talking to is not the right person for my business model or product or service, that's fine. What you need to ask them is, based on everything I've told you, who do you think would be an ideal customer for this? Chances are they'll know someone who could fit into that, that persona. And so what they'll do is they'll refer you to them. And if they make an introduction, chances of you converting are so much higher. Do not ignore the step, because it goes a long way in terms of at least getting your first couple of customers. But if you're getting into like higher ticket clients and higher ticket items, this goes a long way too. It's worked wonders for me in the past. And finally, we had fence sitters. And the way I tried positioning it for them was, how do we make it such a no-brainer, right? So it was just asking them, do you not have, the right gear in the sense, do you have the right apparatus to make coffee? If you don't, you know what, we have a filter along with, the South Indian filter that you'll get for a discounted price. So if you need that, we can send that along as well. And so the concept was to get them to say yes to a no-brainer offer. But the part I want to stress on even more here is that it's very, very important for you to talk to people, especially people you know, and try and sell shit to them, knowing fully well you're going to get shot down. You need to be completely comfortable with the fact that you're going to get a lot of no's, you're going to get rejection, a lot of people are going to ghost you. That's all part and parcel of being a founder or an entrepreneur. If you can't stomach a no, you can't start a business, honestly, because selling is the only way that you actually get money in the business. If you don't have money in the business, it's just a hobby. And so you need to do whatever it takes to put yourself out there, put your product out there, put your service out there, face rejection, and kind of really plow through that. If you don't, you're never going to actually scale a business or even found a business. Another thing to keep in mind here is that selling to people is hard. That's why it's actually best for an early test. Like the earlier you can start talking to people, it might seem a little harder, but I've seen both sides of the coin. Like some people just ghosted me, they didn't respond, whatnot, but a lot of people they wanted to either support me or they found the idea interesting because they were willing to give me some of their time because they already knew me. So this is probably the best time for you to use your warm connections or your hot connection or your close circle or your first connection. So this is a simple way for you to get your first dollar or your first couple of orders. Now you might be thinking that maybe your business idea may not be something that can be sold to everyone around you. That's fine. I'm sure you can find someone who either works in this industry or space that you want to kind of triple down on. If you don't, you can start talking to people who could potentially give you those referrals or those introductions like I mentioned earlier. But the key point here and the main thing to focus on is that you need to really put yourself out there and have those conversations. So phase 1 results, I spoke to about 70 people during the entire sprint of phase. I call it sprint because it was literally 2 to 3 days. We got about 40 customers and we closed $1,400 in 2 days and crossed about $1,500 within a day after. The filter kit add-on was about 15 orders, which meant about 37.5% added on to that first, that South Indian filter coffee variant. The second page of the flyer really helped because a lot of our orders came from people who wanted to buy either this or even a lot of people, I think about 60% of people bought the bundle, which was crazy. Good thing was now we had more people trying out different products of ours, but at the same time, it also meant that, the average order value was much, much higher. Anyway, so going back to the results, it's crazy. Like it really blew my mind that we hit $1,500. And actually, I've recorded the entire day of me getting sales and me following up and all of that. So I'll probably have a completely different series where I break down each and every part of this step even more in detail. I'll go into a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. So if you'd like to see what happens then, hit the subscribe button. One interesting thing that came out of the conversations and from this first phase was something that even my wife asked me, and something that a lot of people worry about is, you don't even know when you're going to get the product in because you don't even have a product, right? So what about the delivery turnaround or the delivery timing and all of that? The funny thing is not a single person. I spoke to about 70 people. We got about 40 customers. Not a single person asked me when it's going to be delivered. All they were focused on was either buying the coffee or trying to support me, or like the whole getting part of the founders batch, because I started selling the founders batch as limited period of time, and we don't have this available for beyond this weekend, something along those lines. And so people didn't really care about the delivery. What they focused more on was, just making payments and getting their name on the order list. This is, if there's one thing to take away from this entire video, it's basically focusing on this piece, is how can you make money without a website, legal entity, licenses, app, inventory without inventory. And again, it all comes down to that transformation or what you offer. Like, can you spin up a story or a product? So basically it's setting expectations when it comes to a product or service. How can you offer, in this case, good taste, promise, and they were also willing to invest in me because clearly they knew me. But at the end of the day, do you have money in the bank, cash in the bank from these products or services that you're putting together? If so, then you have a business. So these are all the orders I got. Some that were like the bundle, and some that were just standalone pieces of coffee. I don't even think these are all the orders, but I just thought I'll include some of the screenshots of the payments or the receipts. Now that we were done with the actual validation phase, or we were done with phase one where we had few orders to fulfill, now is the easier part, in my opinion. Now that you actually have customers, you actually have money in the bank because you have revenue, and you have a fair idea of what the direction is. You know that if you need to fulfill a particular order, you know what needs to be done, then the actual fulfillment becomes fairly straightforward. I had to focus on the packaging, the brand and the labels. I had to focus on the different SKUs and sizes. I had to focus on the logistics piece. I had to focus on the final last mile delivery to customers. And very, very importantly, I had to focus on customer success. There are numerous challenges that I face with each one of these, and I'll have separate videos for each one of them. But the part with the packaging was, long story short, if I had to replicate the exact design that was there in the flyer, then it would mean that I'd have to order about 10,000 pieces minimum order quantity, which was ridiculous for this phase. So I wasn't going to go down that route. So I chose the best looking, classiest white bags, and I think the quantity was 100 quantities or 100 pieces or so. And I printed the stickers locally, separately in India itself. Everything was being done in India, by the way. Next, I also designed the front and back labels myself because I was pretty good at the design piece. I was like, it's not going to be too hard for me to come up with the design. So literally on Canva, I put this all together. It maybe took me like half a day or so. And yeah, so I had to come up with few more designs for each one of these variants. So I didn't call it anything, but then we eventually started calling the South Indian as Decoction Classic. We started calling Arabica as Golden Bloom, and Robusta as Velvet Dusk. And based on all of that, I figured out what would the artwork look like. I kind of got the artwork from ChatGPT, removed the background, tried to render more designs on Canva, and finally I came up with these basic labels that you see here. It's not really basic, it actually looks pretty good in my opinion. And the idea was that I just had to send this out to the stickering company, I don't know what they're called, and they'd basically just put it together and add an adhesive to they'd add an adhesive to the image. So yeah, so these are the three variants. We came up with the labels this way. I don't want to go into all of these details and bore you, but I had to pick out two variants because I also had to, the ones I just showed you here, this is a 340 gram packet, but I also had to come up with a 100 gram packet and for samples and whatnot. But long story short, I had to figure out the packaging, I had to figure out the logistics. And so for logistics, I had to figure out how would I get coffee landed here. I think I used FedEx or something along those lines. And finally, I reached out to an operations or a logistics company here that could do last mile delivery. So that would cover downtown Toronto as well as the rest of Canada, Calgary, Vancouver and GTA, because we had a bunch of orders from those parts as well. The good thing was we had already kind of padded these costs into the COGS, or these were already paid by customers, so which meant that our margins were preserved. And then yeah, all I had to do after getting the coffee here and having it packaged up and dispatched was to let them know that, hey, on WhatsApp or iMessage that, hey, your order has been dispatched, you're going to receive it soon. They confirmed that they had it delivered, and then finally collect feedback and testimonials. This is very, very important. And the good thing was that our product kind of spoke for itself, and so overwhelmingly positive feedback, which was a great thing. And actually, these are all the messages I got from a lot of people that liked the coffee. Yeah, so it was overwhelmingly positive, I would say. And I've gotten to a point where I can't have any other coffee now. I need to have my coffee, which is, I guess, I don't know, a good selfish benefit, I guess. Let's next move on to the financial snapshot. So something that a lot of MBA folks and people who have been in business would really, make the mistake of doing, especially when it comes down to starting a business, is they'd start getting entrenched in coming up with financial models or coming up with Excel sheets that have numerous tabs and trying to break it down in all possible ways. My take is that you just come up with basic numbers that tell you whether a business is healthy or not. So in my case, all I focused on was basically COGS, which would include green beans, it would include roasting, bags, stickers, labeling, labor, shipping from India to Canada, and then finally last mile, right? So I included all of those and kind of had a ballpark number against each one of these, and I also added a buffer on top of that. And that's it. I didn't need numerous tabs for that. All I did was figuring out what a rounded figure would look like, and then knowing fully well that my actual product is going to sell for about $22 eventually, but giving it out at $17.50, which meant that there's a discount. But with all of that, our gross margin was about 40 to 45%. Actually, it was far more. I think conservatively, it fell down to about 40 to 45%. The good thing was that if I got people to buy the bundle, the 3-bag bundle, it would mean that one of them would cover the $10 shipping fee for the bundle. Either ways, in phase one, we hit a profit with everything from not even using a scaled approach for operations where literally the coffee that was sent to me was done through like FedEx or DHL, one of those providers, and was tagged under personal consumption. It wasn't even under the commercial route. And even with all of that, where the air shipping was really, really expensive, we ended up with about $400 to $500. And even with that, it's insane that even in phase one, with everything that I had planned out, that this is the kind of profits that we had, which meant that the margins are super healthy for the business. Again, giving me signs and indicators that there seems to be a future for this business. But what I also did was I used a lot of the profits for samples. So what I mentioned earlier about having separate samples for our next phase, because the plan now is to send this out to numerous different cafes, hotels, restaurants, even corporate companies, especially, just getting them to taste our coffee for free and then asking them to come back for bigger orders. That's what we're doing currently. And so we used all of the profit for that. And then we also invest a little bit more. But then all of this knowing fully well that there seems to be a future for the business. And that's what I want to really focus on, and what I wanted you to take away from this entire video is that you need to validate this ASAP. The quicker you can validate it, the quicker you can get people to pay you money, the better. Now that I knew that the business idea had some promise and we finished phase one, it was done, pretty much a success. The idea now is to get into phase two, where we're doing a lean D2C, which means we're building out the website, we're tripling down on the brand and what we can do to get the word out there. So domain, simple e-commerce, subscriptions, organic content, but plus maybe light PR, and running a few small test ads if needed, and then eventually extending to Amazon, Walmart, Loblaws, and also some Indian grocery stores for other lines of revenue or business. And phase three is also kind of going to happen in parallel, which is to talk to B2B channels like I mentioned. So talking to cafes, restaurants, groceries, and office spaces, and having pilot orders where there's small contracts and like shelf trials is something that we are focusing on. And eventually, this is almost like coming back full circle, right? Can we get to a point where we can have a flagship cafe? So maybe if we see promise with everything we're planning to do with the phases 1, 2, and 3, or rather 2 and 3, if we see promise, then we'll have a future where this could potentially take the form of a cafe. One thing I want to stress on, maybe if I had made this video a few years ago, this wouldn't apply here, but I want to just stress on how easy things are with AI. Like, a lot of people try to do every single thing with AI, but I think if you can get the right activities to be done by AI, then you're leveraging your time the right way. And so in my case, I had hyper realistic packaging renders, And the brand copy, naming brainstorms and flyer structure, all of those came from AI. So I didn't need to have an expert or a consultant on board. And obviously this reduced my costs and time, and it also gave a perceived product reality. And that is very, very crucial. And I think we live in a day and age or time that a lot of this is possible, but for you to really use AI to your benefit, you need to be clear on your vision and thinking, and you need to think about the smallest pie or the smallest piece of that puzzle. And so the big principle here is that if you can use AI and if it feels real, it sells. And then you can actually make it real. And so in this case, I didn't have a product, but the flyer kind of painted a clear picture and got to a point where I knew exactly what's the direction I needed to head with the packaging as well, because it had taken some form on the flyer. Now it's just talking about the different takeaways, right? So I told you AI is a key factor here for sure. But another thing that I want to really, really stress on, and I cannot stress on this enough, is that sales is super, super important. Personal sales beats broadcast every single day. So like I told you, in my case, it was about really tapping into your warm network and having an honest one-on-one or one-to-one conversation, and also like recommending the right product based on their habits and behaviors also goes a long way. And like I said, keeping it super simple. Like all I had was a flyer and just getting people to chat with me over DM and making a payment online, through Interact. And so the big takeaway is that every single part of founding, and I would even say beyond that, even in terms of scaling, is all in sales. It could be product, it could be team, it could be investors, it could be customers, it's all sales. And so I want this to be another massive takeaway, that if you can't face rejection, you can't put yourself out there, and you can't really focus on sales over everything else, marketing will come later, perfecting the product will come later, everything else will come later. But if you can't focus on sales, this whole thing is pointless. Yeah, and I think I did touch on the customer delivery and success piece, and I showed you a few of the examples as well, so I'm not going to harp on about this anymore. And so where are we now? Like I mentioned earlier, we're done with sales to date is about 1,500. It's actually gone well beyond that. I haven't included this here, but now I'm really focusing on getting the build right. And because like I said, I have a business, I can actually focus on perfecting the website, knowing what are the variants that really work, which are the cash cows in our variants or SKUs. And so that's the focus. And the real aim now is to get to a point where we can get about 3 to 4 B2B deals and make this super profitable quickly, because we actually fulfill these orders and got coffee landed here. We know the different steps in the supply chain, and so we're just tripling down on that and figuring out what are the easy ways for us to get coffee here. Apparently it takes about 60 days for coffee to get landed here, but the point I'm trying to make is that I would have never known if I didn't go through that initial process. So my suggestion to you too is the same thing. Like, think about how you can start selling and actually fulfilling whatever your products or services are, because you'll learn a lot more by getting your customers to interact with your product or service and then getting feedback. And then as you go through this time and again, it gets better and you have numerous iterations of your product and service. And by the end of it, you have a much better product, much better service than what you actually initially started off with. And so there's one big takeaway from this entire video. It's that you need the right way to build something, and you need the right way to validate it. If you don't do either of that, this whole thing is pointless. It's not going to become a business. And so don't try to perfect in private. Don't try to sit at your desk with your system trying to perfect a product or a service by not talking to your customers, by just thinking that this is the best way for you to build something. What you instead need to do is talk to actual people, because at the end of the day, it's other people who are going to buy your product. You're not buying your own product. And so the fundamental rule here is you don't want to perfect in private. You want to really validate in public. And that will only come if you really start having those conversations like I mentioned earlier. But more importantly, you need to sell to them. You need to actually get them to try your product out, get feedback, and then actually get the ball or the wheel spinning in this case. So it's almost like we've come full circle, because what I started the video off with is what I'll end the video off with as well, which is most people basically build and then try to sell, and through this process also kind of learn, and then they try to scale. I would even say a lot of people try to scale right at the beginning, This whole thing is super flawed. What you need to instead do is sell first, learn, build better, and then scale. That's the only way a business picks up in the initial stages. And more importantly, if you need to check whether people are going to pay you before it even exists, because people are not technically paying for the product, they're paying for some sort of convenience or some sort of alleviation of some pain point or some problem that they have. And so you need to be able to paint that picture as a founder or as an entrepreneur. And again, if you don't do that, then you don't have something worth betting on. And so it's very important for you to validate in public and have paying customers. I guess that's pretty much it. Like I mentioned here, there's going to be a series around this where I'm going to take each and every step of this and really break it down, tear it down, and approach this in a way that is digestible, or small bits of the bigger picture. And apart from this too, the business I'm building right now, or my way of helping people build a business even while they're employed, is another one of my business offerings. And what I'm also going to do is talk about that in public and go through the entire framework the same way I went through this today. And so what I really appreciate is if you watch the build, you give me feedback, leave comments, reach out, email, DM on Instagram. Yeah, actually, I'm pretty active on Instagram as well, and a lot of behind the scenes stuff is something I share on Instagram, so you can actually drop me a follow there. And yeah, I respond to pretty much all the DMs that come my way. So drop me a DM there and we can get chatting. And if you are a buyer or a partner in coffee and you're interested in kind of being part of the money journey or story, then reach out, because we're looking for a few partners or few people who we'd like to cater to. So reach out if that is of interest to you. Before I wind up, if you're one who's been on the fence, who's always wanted to start a business of your own, even if you're employed, then like I mentioned earlier, the free guide I put together, which is basically an email course, 15 steps in 15 days to build and start a profitable business, even if you have a full-time day job. It's completely free. It's always going to be free, and you can unsubscribe anytime you want. But trust me when I say that there's a lot of strategic, a lot of behavioral, a lot of productivity-based tips and frameworks that I wish I had when I was starting out on my entrepreneurial journey, when I was starting with my first business. You can subscribe by hitting the first link in the description, or you can just comment guide below and we'll send it over to you. All right, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.
I got a lot of shit to say, so I'ma do this every day.